For us, 2025 started with a bang. We went to Vegas for CES, the nirvana of any tech enthusiast who gets an orgasm from seeing new gadgets and components. Besides the launch of the RTX 5000 series, one of my favorite booths at this year's CES was Republic of Gamers. And the product that caught my attention the most at that moment was this little giant right here, called ROG Flow Z13, an absolutely insane device that we finally got our hands on for review. Why did it stand out to me? Well, the main reason, aside from its exotic Windows tablet format, is the incredible raw power under the hood. You see, the new ROG Flow Z13 comes equipped with the equally new and spectacular Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, the flagship of AMD's new generation of mobile chipsets, the one that AMD claims to wipe the floor with Apple's M4. That's why I use the term chipset instead of processor, because the AI Max Plus 395 is actually an APU, meaning we have a single chip that houses both the main processor and the GPU, so powerful that it can rival dedicated graphics cards, you know, the ones that take up multiple slots. Don't believe me? Well, stick around in this video and let's take a deep dive into this spectacular ROG Flow Z13. Before we get to the main course, meaning test and performance, let me hold you in suspense a bit longer while we talk about design and build quality. I mentioned earlier that we're dealing with a tablet, which means all components are crammed behind the screen, not under the keyboard like in a regular laptop. This could cause some issues when it comes to temperatures and cooling, given that the screen itself is a significant heat source, but we'll get to that later. For now, I can say that I really like how the ROG Flow Z13 looks. Like all ROG products, the Z13 embraces an aggressive gaming device aesthetic with an RGB strip surrounding the transparent glass panel through which you can see some of the internal components. Also on the back, there is a metal stand attached with extremely solid hinges, very easy to operate and doing its job perfectly. The device's thickness of 1.5 centimeters is a bit much, even more than some laptops, as is its weight of 1.2 kilos. But that's somewhat understandable considering the hardware inside. This means it's quite difficult to use the Z13 as a regular tablet because it's heavy to hold for long periods, so for the most part you'll be using it on a desk like a laptop. But it is, after all, a tablet, which is obvious when we look at the cameras. A 5-megapixel front camera with Windows Hello and a 13-megapixel rear camera. Because yes, now you can take vacation photos with your $3,000 gaming tablet, as if anyone would ever do that. The photo quality is exactly what you'd expect, and in my opinion, they could have skipped the rear camera altogether. The keyboard included in the package also doubles as a screen cover and is decent, but nothing more. The key travel is extremely short, but the keys are large enough so you don't press multiple ones by mistake. And the trackpad, although generously sized, is not the most precise I've used. The entire unit attaches magnetically to the chassis and is fine if you need to quickly write an email, but I wouldn't recommend this keyboard for writers working on their memoirs. And now let's put aesthetics aside and discuss what really matters with this product. Performance. As I mentioned earlier, the version we received for testing is the top tier one, featuring the AMD AI Max Plus 395 with 16 Zen 5 CPU cores and no less than 40 RDNA 3.5 compute units on the GPU. Yes, you heard that right, 40 compute units, an enormous number. To put it into context, the RX 7500 XT, which is a dedicated graphics card, has only 32 compute units. And keep in mind that we're talking about nearly the same architecture, so these cores are extremely similar, if not identical. And I'm so hyped because this is the first time we've gotten our hands on this fabulous processor, which caught my attention the moment it was announced at CES 2 months ago. But before we see if the integrated graphics in the AI Max Plus 395 perform well in games, let's talk a bit about the other specs, starting with RAM. The model we received for testing has 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, but you can configure the Flow Z13 with up to, brace yourself, 128 gigs of RAM. You don't need that much for gaming, that's clear, but you can also use this tablet as a machine for local AI processing. LLMs love VRAM, the more the better, and in the maximum configuration you can allocate up to 96 gigs from the system memory just for VRAM. So if besides gaming you're also running local AI workloads, the Flow Z13 might turn out to be the perfect tool. But I don't know how many potential buyers of this product will be running LLMs locally on their gaming tablet, so let's talk about games. And I want to revisit the discussion about the integrated GPU and answer the question, is this integrated beast better than a dedicated graphics card? Well, not quite, and that's because in the end it all comes down to watts. Simply put, while, for example, the 7600 XT can draw 190 watt from the power supply just by itself, the total TDP of the entire chip here, meaning both CPU and GPU, is 120. And no matter how you spin it, physics is physics, and this difference in power consumption is quite significant. This translates into very good gaming performance, but below what you can get with a dedicated graphics card, which was to be expected. That being said, the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 is by far the most powerful integrated graphics chipset ever made, and I've never seen an APU run games this well. To give you some numbers, in Cyberpunk 2077 at Full HD resolution with high settings and low ray tracing, we got 63 FPS with FSR 3 on quality and no frame generation. I don't know about you, but I find it incredible that you can play Cyberpunk with ray tracing at over 60 FPS on a tablet with integrated graphics. And if that's not enough, you can enable frame generation, which pushes the frame rate past 110. Jesus H. Christ. Without any FSR, we got 50 FPS, which is playable, even if many people aren't happy with anything below 60, especially in a first-person game like Cyberpunk. It's also worth mentioning that we allocated 16 gigs for VRAM out of the available 32 GB. Things also look good in Black Myth Wukong, where you can get 125 FPS on medium settings with FSR and frame generation enabled. If you crank the details up to the cinematic preset, the frame rate drops, predictably, but still maintains a healthy 51 FPS, and in this type of game, I can settle for that. Let's not forget that Bloodborne runs at 30 FPS, but that didn't stop some from calling it the best action RPG of all time. What matters in the end is that the frame rate is stable, and I didn't encounter any frame time issues on the Flow Z13. Next up in our test suite is F1 2024, and at the screen's native resolution of 2560 by 1600 pixels, with max settings and FSR on quality, we got 47 FPS. If you enable frame generation, you easily reach over 80, which is a truly commendable performance for a tablet with integrated graphics. If you're not really into gaming and all you care about is CPU performance, we're looking great here as well. 26,000 points in Cinebench R23 is no joke and is comparable to scores achieved by the Ryzen 9 5950X, a high-end desktop processor that, while a bit older, is still a powerhouse when it comes to productivity. As mentioned earlier, the AI Max Plus 395 also features a massive NPU with 50 TOPS. This means the tablet is Copilot Plus compatible, if that's something that interests you. And if we go by the scores, AMD really seems to have struck gold with their new chipset. With a score of over 20,000 points in Geekbench, it demolishes the M4 and is on par with the M3 Max in my own laptop. As for the graphics, there's not much else to say. The 40 graphic cores are a real powerhouse in a portable format. It's absolutely impressive what AMD has managed to achieve with their new chip, and in a chassis with a bit more cooling power, I think it would perform even better, though it's already quite impressive as it is. And since we've brought up the form factor, despite the compact chassis, temperatures weren't excessively high. Sure, 86 degrees Celsius on the CPU isn't exactly a low temperature, and sometimes you can feel a bit of throttling, especially when the system is under full load on both the CPU and GPU. But overall, I'm satisfied with how the Flow Z13's cooling holds up. In gaming, you'll almost never have full load on both components, and when the GPU is pushed to the max, while the processor is under less strain, the cooling system here manages to keep things under control quite well. Now that we've seen how the Flow Z13 performs in gaming, very well in fact, let's talk about the screen you'll be playing those games on. And here we hit the first disappointment. The screen is IPS, not OLED. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this display is bad, but an IPS panel simply doesn't compare to an OLED one, whether we're talking about phones, TVs or tablets. Not to mention that I feel like the era of IPS is coming to an end, especially on expensive devices, and soon we'll see just how expensive this one is. If it were up to me, every device with a screen should have an OLED panel, because the benefits of absolute black levels, infinite contrast and response times under 1 millisecond are impossible to ignore and unmatched by yesterday's technologies such as IPS. Yes, the IPS panel on the Flow Z13 is okay, but it's not exceptional. It does have a refresh rate of 180 Hz, but even that isn't particularly high, considering the price segment of this tablet. Laptops in a similar price range already come with 240 Hz displays, but since you won't be hitting 180 FPS in most demanding games, I don't think this is a huge issue. What could be a problem though is the maximum brightness of 500 nits, which, although sufficient to meet the Dolby Vision HDR standard, isn't ideal considering the Flow is a tablet designed to be portable and used outdoors. And with summer approaching and the sun staying in the sky longer, you might struggle with dark scenes in games when playing outside during the day. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to consider if you plan to game a lot on the go, which is kind of the whole point of a tablet like this. Since it's a portable device, of course, it has a battery, duh. The Flow Z13 comes with a large 70 Wh battery, which should provide decent battery life if you use it for light tasks and don't push it hard with gaming. However, the massive 200 watt charger designed to power this beast is big and heavy, and you'll definitely feel it when carrying it around in your backpack. The port selection isn't great, but it gets the job done. 2 USB-C ports and a single USB-A feel a bit limited, and I would have appreciated an extra USB-A, especially for a mouse or keyboard, but it's manageable. Besides the USB port, you also get a full-size HDMI 2.1, a charging port, a microSD card slot that content creators will appreciate, and a combo headphone plus microphone jack. The lack of an Ethernet port might bother some, but with full support for Wi-Fi 7, the latest and fastest wireless internet standard, I can't really complain. But if you absolutely need a wired internet connection, you can always use an adapter. The ROG Flow Z13 comes with a 1TB PCI Express 4.0 SSD, which might seem a bit small considering the size of modern games. Hell, Call of Duty alone takes up around 300 gigs, so that 1TB could fill up pretty fast. The good news is that Asus has been considerate and didn't solder the SSD onto the motherboard, so you can replace it with a larger one if you wish. I would have liked to see an extra slot so that you wouldn't have to give up the existing SSD, but it's fine as it is, especially considering we're talking about a tablet with limited internal space. And one area where this lack of space is quite noticeable is in the speakers. The volume output is fairly high, but the sound quality isn't great, and at maximum volume, distortion is quite pronounced. The audio system is fine for a movie or a TV show, but for music, I wasn't particularly impressed, and I hope that the next generation improves this aspect of the speakers. Before we give a final verdict, let's talk about the price. The version we tested, with the AI Max Plus 395, costs $3,000 on Asus's official website, a steep sum even when you factor in the performance level offered. Sure, it's cool that you can rely entirely on an integrated graphics solution, but a gaming laptop either costs less for the same frame rates in games or performs better if the price is similar. According to current pre-orders available online, a laptop with an RTX 5080 costs about the same, and although I haven't tested one with Nvidia's new graphics cards yet, I can already tell you that such a model will perform better in games than a Flow Z13, which is to be expected. Okay, so it's not for gamers. Then who is it for? A plausible scenario I can think of is one where you need to run local AI workloads extensively, in which case the ability to configure up to 128 GB of RAM could be very useful. But let's be honest, who looks for a tablet for that? Maybe a few fanatics, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Beyond that, the Flow Z13 is quite large and heavy to be used as a tablet, and its high price makes it an inferior option compared to gaming laptops if all you care about is playing in the best conditions. However, if you like this form factor and want the most powerful mobile chipset ever, then yes, the Flow Z13 is worth buying. And besides the bragging rights, you'll also own a true engineering masterpiece. Once again, I feel like traditional players like Asus and AMD are beginning to explore usage scenarios where Apple reigns supreme. Their M-series processor, which power both their tablets and laptops, have dominated in recent years. But with new chipsets and devices from the Windows camp, like this Ryzen AI Max and this Flow Z13, things are starting to get competitive. After last year's ARM push on Windows in this segment of ultra-portable devices, it's now the turn of the traditional x86 architecture, which has the advantage of total compatibility with any Windows application, to prove that it still has a strong role to play. I think what AMD and Asus have achieved here is exceptional, and I believe we are in for some very exciting times. That being said, let's hear from you in the comments. What do you think of the new ROG Flow Z13 and its exceptional Ryzen AI Max Plus 395? What's your take on this idea of a gaming tablet capable of performance comparable to a dedicated gaming laptop? Honestly, if the price were lower, let's say by a third, I wouldn't hesitate. But at $3,000, unfortunately, it remains out of reach for a significant number of users. That's it for today. Please subscribe to Techniqualities. Thank you all and good luck.